December 8, 1941, in the corridors of the Imperial Japanese Navy headquarters in Tokyo, the air vibrated with almost electric exhilaration as officers hurried through the building with glowing pride, exchanging congratulatory bows and animated declarations about the triumphant blow Japan had delivered that morning. Yet amid the fervor sat Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, silent and motionless at the head of a long polished table, his expression a mask concealing the storm of dread rising within him. Because he, perhaps alone among the upper ranks of Japan's military elite, understood that the devastating attack on Pearl Harbor, though tactically brilliant and shocking in its execution, had not ensured Japan's victory, but instead had awakened a colossal industrial power capable of waging a scale of war far beyond anything the empire could hope to match. Outside his window, junior officers laughed, some discussing the battleships they had sent to the bottom, others imagining America begging for peace. But Yamamoto's mind drifted far from their celebration, back to the years he had spent studying at Harvard and serving as naval attaché in Washington, years during which he had traveled through American cities and witnessed a world Japan's leaders pretended did not exist. Endless automobile factories in Detroit where assembly lines poured out vehicles at a pace Japanese industries could scarcely fathom. Giant steel foundries whose smoke-darkened horizons dwarfed anything in Osaka or Nagoya, and the boundless oil fields of Texas where wells pumped oceans of petroleum each day. Fuel reserves so enormous that the American Navy, Air Force, and Army could grow exponentially while Japan rationed every drop. Yamamoto had walked their streets, listened to their politicians, observed their culture, and he knew something his colleagues refused to understand. That America was not merely a nation but a continent-sized industrial force capable of transforming anger into material production with terrifying speed. 6 months earlier he had warned Prime Minister Fumimaro Kono that while Japan might fight courageously for the first 6 months of war, he held absolutely no confidence in Japan's ability to endure a prolonged struggle of 2 or 3 years against the United States. Yet now, as his earlier words echoed hauntingly in his mind, he realized that the countdown toward inevitable defeat had already begun even before the fires at Pearl Harbor were fully extinguished, because while the attack had sunk or damaged 8 battleships and destroyed nearly 200 aircraft, the American aircraft carriers, the true pillars of modern naval warfare, had escaped untouched, and more importantly, the attack had unified a previously divided American public behind total war. This unity meant that the calculations governing Japan's grand strategy, long predicated on assumptions of American softness, indecision, and unwillingness to fight, were fatally flawed from the outset, and Yamamoto sensed with a sinking heart that his nation had just triggered the most overwhelming industrial mobilization ever witnessed in human history, a mobilization Japan's military planners had never truly comprehended even though the statistics had long been available to them, plainly demonstrating that Japan possessed only a fraction, barely 5.2%, of global industrial output compared to America's staggering 42%, yet despite discussion in planning rooms, memos warning of the disparity, and genuine concern from a few sober officers, Japan's leaders chose to gamble on a strategy that depended entirely on swift, decisive victories and the hope that America would negotiate rather than endure hardship. This hope, born from a mixture of cultural arrogance, strategic desperation, and profound misreading of American character, blinded Japan's leadership to the reality that modern war is not won by spirit alone but by factories, fuel, steel, ships and supply lines stretching across oceans. The Grand Japanese War Plan, orchestrated throughout the 1930s during Japan's expansion into Manchuria, China, and Southeast Asia, envisioned a rapid seizure of resource-rich territories that would provide Japan with oil, rubber, tin, and minerals while simultaneously constructing a defensive perimeter so vast and fortified that any American counteroffensive would require blood and treasure far exceeding American political tolerance. But what Japanese strategists failed to consider was that America's vast territory, mechanized workforce, and technological infrastructure enabled it to replace losses, ships, aircraft, tanks, even entire fleets, at a pace Japan could not begin to match. Yamamoto, who had witnessed Americans' capacity for innovation and production, knew this intimately. Yet even he underestimated how quickly America would mobilize. As Japanese forces swept across the Pacific during the first 6 months, seizing the Philippines, Guam, Hong Kong, Singapore, the Dutch East Indies, and Burma with near-surgical precision, Japan's military became intoxicated with victory, reinforcing the dangerous illusion that American industrial strength had been exaggerated. But beneath the surface the tide had already begun to turn, first with the Doolittle Raid, a symbolic attack that startled Tokyo and highlighted Japan's vulnerability. Then with the Battle of Coral Sea, where American forces halted Japanese expansion toward Port Moresby, and finally with the Battle of Midway in June 1942, the battle that would expose every structural weakness in Japan's strategic assumptions. At Midway, American cryptanalysts had cracked Japanese naval codes, allowing Admiral Chester Nimitz to position his carriers perfectly, while shipyard laborers at Pearl Harbor performed miracles repairing USS Yorktown in just 72 hours, enabling her to join USS Enterprise and USS Hornet in ambushing the Japanese carrier strike force. The resulting 5-minute window in which American dive bombers crippled Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, later destroying Hiryu, did more than eliminate 4 irreplaceable carriers. It annihilated Japan's core of elite naval aviators and skilled mechanics, assets that Japan lacked the training capacity and industrial capability to replace. And while Japan believed it could still prevail through spirit and tactical brilliance, the cold arithmetic of industrial warfare had already sealed its fate, because in the 3 years following Midway, American shipyards produced 17 Essex-class carriers, 9 Independence-class light carriers, and dozens of escort carriers, while Japanese yards produced only 6. An imbalance so vast it made Japanese attempts to regain naval superiority a tragic impossibility. Meanwhile, American factories produced aircraft in such numbers that by 1944 the United States manufactured more planes in a single year than Japan did in the entire war, and while American fighters evolved from Wildcats to Hellcats to Corsairs, each generation superior in speed, firepower, durability, and altitude performance, the Japanese Zero, once dominant, remained technologically stagnant, increasingly fragile, and hopelessly outmatched. American pilot training programs graduated thousands of combat-ready aviators each year with extensive practice in navigation, gunnery, and aerial combat, while Japan, bleeding experienced pilots at Guadalcanal and in the Solomons, shortened training cycles drastically, sending barely prepared pilots into deadly skies they would never return from. American submarines, operating relentlessly across Japan's supply routes, sank merchant ships faster than Japan could build them, cutting off oil from the Dutch East Indies, starving Japanese factories, grounding aircraft, immobilizing ships, and plunging Japan's economy into an irreversible death spiral. By 1944 Japan's logistical situation had deteriorated so severely that entire island garrisons starved while American forces arrived with overwhelming abundance. Fuel, ammunition, medicine, rations, equipment, and ships constantly replenishing forward bases with industrial ease. The decisive turning point, strategically and psychologically, arrived during the Mariana Islands campaign, when Saipan, Tinian, and Guam fell in 1944, placing B-29 superfortress bombers within range of Tokyo and precipitating the collapse of Prime Minister Hideki Tojo's government, while the Battle of the Philippine Sea, known to American pilots as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, obliterated Japan's naval air power with catastrophic losses, proving that Japan could no longer contest American air superiority. Following this, the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the largest naval battle in history, destroyed what remained of the Imperial Japanese Navy, leaving Japan without the ability to project force or even defend its own waters. Yet still its leaders refused to surrender, clinging to fantasies of inflicting massive casualties during an American invasion of the home islands, even as American strategic bombing reduced city after city to ashes. Tokyo's firebombing in March 1945 alone killed nearly 100,000 people, more than either atomic bombing individually, and as hundreds of thousands died in similar raids across 66 cities, Japan's military leadership retreated deeper into delusion, ignoring starvation, industrial collapse, and societal breakdown. The final psychological blow came when the Soviet Union declared war on Japan on August 8, 1945, invading Manchuria with overwhelming force and annihilating the once feared Guangdong army in a matter of days, eliminating Japan's last diplomatic hope for mediated peace, even after atomic bombs devastated Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Killing over 130,000 people initially and many more from radiation, Japan's hardline military leaders still attempted to block surrender, forcing Emperor Hirohito to intervene personally in a moment unprecedented in Japanese history, breaking centuries of imperial silence to announce Japan's capitulation on August 15, 1945. A message delivered in cautious language that only hinted at the immensity of Japan's defeat, but nonetheless shattered the illusion of invincibility that had been cultivated for decades. In the months that followed, as American occupation forces arrived with a level of material abundance Japanese civilians had never imagined, jeeps, canned foods, medical supplies, machines, radios, tools, even chocolate bars and cigarettes, Japan's former military leaders, now interrogated or standing trial, were finally forced to confront the magnitude of their miscalculations. Men like Hideki Tojo admitted they had never understood American industrial capacity. Others confessed that intelligence reports had warned of America's overwhelming production potential but had been dismissed because accepting them meant accepting inevitable defeat before the war even began. And Admiral Somu Toyoda later reflected that Japanese officers had understood American superiority intellectually but not emotionally, choosing to believe that spirit, honor, and sacrifice could overcome steel, fuel, and machinery, a belief history proved devastatingly false. The United States Strategic Bombing Survey quantified the industrial disparity with cold precision. America built 300,000 aircraft to Japan's 76,000, 2 million trucks to Japan's 165,000, tens of thousands of tanks compared to Japan's mere hundreds, thousands of ships compared to Japan's few dozen, and in category after category: steel, oil, aluminum, electronics, vehicles, artillery. The United States outproduced Japan by factors of 10, 20, even 50 in some fields, making Japan's defeat mathematically certain from the moment Pearl Harbor was attacked, a truth Yamamoto had sensed even as others celebrated. And so, the story of Japan's high command realizing America's true power is not merely a narrative of battles lost and territory conquered, but a sweeping cautionary tale about the catastrophic consequences of strategic self-deception, institutional arrogance, and the fatal refusal to accept reality even when the evidence is overwhelming, a tale in which every warning sign was present: intelligence reports, industrial statistics, logistical analyses, the personal testimonies of officers like Yamamoto, yet ignored until the flames of war consumed the empire entirely, leaving millions dead and the nation in ruins. And as modern Japan later rose from those ruins to become an economic powerhouse through peaceful industry rather than military conquest, the ultimate irony became clear. The industrial strength Japan had once sought to seize by force could only be achieved through cooperation, trade, and technological innovation, not through war. And the lesson burned into history between 1941 and 1945 stands as one of humanity's most powerful reminders that industrial power, not pride, not spirit, not the romanticism of battle, determines the fate of nations in modern war, a truth Yamamoto understood the moment the attack on Pearl Harbor succeeded, and a truth his nation learned only through devastating, irrevocable loss.